Okay, go ahead, Mom. Um, just test it real quick. Make sure it's.
Oh, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, you're good. Okay. Um, this is Internal Dialogues of a Curious Human. I'm Abigail, your host, and we're just picking up where we left off for part one on our relationship with math. My mom is still here, so couldn't really do it without her. Um, so yeah, we're just gonna like pick up where we left off with the previous episode, which was we were still talking about like projects that we had done in my class when my mom was teaching. And one of the big projects, and I think it's important to talk about, is the penny project. So I don't really remember why we were doing it. What were we learning about?
Well, I'm pretty sure that was your 8th grade year, and you guys were learning about linear equations and how to graph them. So like you were figuring out how to calculate the slope of a line, or figure out, where the y-intercept was, things like that. But again, unless you have some concrete example or project that is like hands on, it's just going to seem like, why am I having to learn this? I don't even understand how this is relevant to my world. And so, I came up with that penny project, and I went down to the science lab and I got, just the portable scales. And then I asked everybody to bring in, like, if they could, I really wanted them to have like 100 pennies, but if they could only round up, 20 or 50 or whatever, we were just going to put them all in a pot, and then everybody was just going to get a certain amount of
Right.
pennies.
Right.
And
Yeah, so if you couldn't find 100 pennies, like don't go get a roll of pennies from the bank.
exactly.
Just get the loose change from like couch cushions and stuff like that.
Right. And so,
It wasn't absolutely necessary that you had
right,
exactly $1.
right. And, so the idea is that, you know, you would, weigh 1 penny and figure out, like, how many grams of weight that penny
Was, yeah.
was. And then you'd put 2 pennies and then, write that down. So you learned how to make like an XY chart.
Right.
And so, you know, in theory, you know, 2 pennies should just be double what the 1 penny
Yeah.
weighed, right? And
Right.
so the idea is that you were going to start, creating these dots that you were then going to be able to connect, and then you would extrapolate that line, and then, I would say, okay, so 50 pennies, which you would never be asked to weigh
Right.
50,
Yeah.
but you should be able to go to the graph and see, so if I have 50 pennies, then I should be able to go up to the line and then, go over to the y axis, and that should tell me how much 50, how much 50 pennies
Ways.
would weigh.
Right.
And the thing is that
At some point.
at some point we began to realize that the graph wasn't working out the
Right. It
way
didn't like instead of it going
straight up.
straight up like you would assume that it would, you
Yeah,
know.
it was deviating.
It was like all the and you're supposed to have a couple. It's not uncommon
Yeah,
when you have a graph to have a couple of points that are just like way out of the way. They're
right.
called
The outliers,
outliers.
those outliers. But this was starting to begin to have too many outliers.
Right.
And, in a 50-minute class period, it was taking quite a while just to, weigh then transferring that information to an XY chart and then taking that information and putting it on a graph. And yes, they were doing all of this by hand because,
Yeah.
again, if they really wanted to have an appreciation for how this graph was getting constructed, they needed to do it as a hands-on project, not just something that where they entered data into an Excel spreadsheet and then graphed it
Right.
data in an Excel spreadsheet. That wasn't the goal. But it was toward the end of the class period that we began to realize that something wasn't going awry. And,
Right. And nobody could really figure out what the deal was.
Right. And I said that I was going to have to kind of think about it. And then the class came to a close, and I said, well, I'll figure out what's going on, and then we'll fix it tomorrow. And so the next day, one of Abigail's classmates came in and announced that he knew.
Well, you forgot about it, didn't you?
Yeah,
you were like, we had other stuff going on because, mind you, my mom's wasn't just a teacher at this point. Like, she did have me and my sister, plus housework and all. It just life kind of got in the way, and you forgot, or you just waited, you could.
Yeah,
something happened, and it just wasn't an important thing on the list.
Correct, I remember that. But like I said, one of Abigail's classmates came in the next day, and he announced that he knew what was wrong.
Right, and we were all like, all right, cool. What do you think's wrong?
Right, and it was really, very validating for me that, this student had been, so taken in a positive manner with the project that he, on his own.
Right, it was bothering him so much that he was like, I have to figure this out.
Right, so
I need to know.
Yeah, exactly. And he researched it and figured it out. And what the problem was is that pennies that were, and I can't remember the exact.
It was 85 or I don't even know.
It was 81 or 82, I think. But anyway, the U.S. Mint changed the ratio of, I think, the copper and the nickel or whatever it was that they were using to make pennies at that time. And so when they changed it, well, that meant that the weight changed.
Right.
And you can look at it as mass, just whatever.
Right, whatever.
We called it weight because that was what you guys.
We weren't really doing that right. Then we were more worried about the graph.
Right. And so then what we had to do was we had to sort all the pennies and put all of the.
Right, the ones that were made.
Whatever, 81 or 82 in a pile, and then.
Post.
And then post. And so then, they kind of broke up a half, that half of them had pennies that were, pre 81, 82, and then the other half had pennies that were post. And then the graphs were working out perfectly fine. But, we had a big class discussion about that, and everybody was really into it. And that was my whole goal as a teacher, was to make math fun.
Right, and interesting and also relevant.
Right. Exactly. And that if something isn't working out, then you do need to start asking those questions about, well, what could be wrong?
Right.
And, they were, through that whole school year, we were always doing those kinds of projects, and they began to have an appreciation for that things do go wrong, and that
right, but it's
throw up your hand.
Right, but also it's okay if they go wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean that you totally botched the project or whatever it was. It's more it was more along the lines of oh no, this happens all the time in the real world where stuff, stuff isn't going to work out exactly the way you thought it would work out, or it's not always going to go according to plan, or you might end up with data that is so different from what you originally,
or what somebody else had.
Right. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that like it's bad or it's wrong.
Right. And there was another project that we did this particular school year. The local 4-year university, the math department, they had gotten a grant from the state to teach teachers how to program in this language called Logo.
Oh yeah.
And Logo was, you could graph things, or you could tell the mouse to,
Well, it taught you how to program.
Right, it did. The mouse was only going to do what you told it to do.
Yeah, and that like exactly what you do. So if you like messed up a command and like you didn't get the picture that you wanted, that was legitimately on you, because you had to go back through and figure out like, well, I thought I told it exactly what I wanted to do, only to find out that, oh no. In fact, I didn't tell it to, turn in the direction that I wanted it to turn, or whatever.
Right, and there were 12 to 15 people in her class, and so each one of them was sitting at their own computer, with their own program, working on their own individual program. And some people were trying to draw a house in the program, and other people were,
Thought it was a star at some point.
Was the final project.
Oh yeah.
You guys had to draw a 5-pointed
Star. Yeah.
But what was so interesting was that at first they did get frustrated when the mouse wouldn't draw what they told it to draw, and they would help each other because there's only one of me.
Right.
And so they would help each other find the bug.
Uh-huh.
And then they'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I see what I did wrong. And then I had other students who figured out that I had only taught them like a certain number of commands.
Right, I was gonna say, I feel like there at one point did come a time when like someone was like, we can do color or something like that, and it was like, oh, like show me,
Right, and so they had gotten out, several of them had gotten out on the web and found out that there were all these other commands that they could be using, and then they incorporated those commands into their program. And yeah, at the end they were all able to draw a 5-pointed star, plus
right, do whatever.
They could take individual parts of the star and add in color, and they just thought that was the coolest thing. But the thing that they took away from that, which is what the whole point that I was trying to impress upon them, was they were capable of going through the code and finding where their bugs were, which then in the classroom translated to, if you didn't get the right answer to a problem, they were finally open-minded enough that they began to realize that they needed to go back and figure out where their error was.
Right, but also I feel like there is an element too of like, it's okay if like you go back through your own work and you just cannot find the bug. Like you cannot figure out what step you messed up or whatever it is. Like go ask, even a classmate, like we weren't afraid to be like, hey, so I got 14 and you got 12 and I really can't figure out, like I've looked at both of our stuff and I still can't figure out. To me it looks like we've done the exact same thing, but I still don't know why we're getting different answers.
Right,
and then you go through it together, but then sometimes it would be like, well, now we both don't know who's right or who's wrong, and so then you you kind of go around. And I do remember that, like, if like too many people like got involved and we were all convinced that, like, we all had the right answer and none of us could figure out where we'd gone wrong, at that point you would kind of take over and be like, all right, I guess we're going to work it, because but I don't remember that happening a lot. I do remember of it, like, most of the time it was very much like, oh, okay, I see what I did, or like, I don't understand why did you use this, or whatever. Or sometimes, you know, you would figure out why you did something wrong, but also the inverse happened, which were like you would compare and they would realize that they had done something wrong and you were correct. And so it kind of built that confidence of like, you know, don't be afraid. Like, just go ask.
Well, and when I would have them confer with each other, like usually they were in pairs,
Yeah.
and when they would work the problem and then they would confer with their partner, I really wanted them to feel confident about what they had done. And so it was almost like if they had gotten different answers, it was almost like, and not in a mean way or not in an arrogant way, I wanted them to take the position of, I'm right, so I think I'm right, so you prove to me where I went wrong.
Right.
And like I said, there's a fine line.
I don't ever remember feeling uh like there was a lot of arrogance in the classroom. I don't ever remember feeling like, uh yeah, like there was a lot of arrogance in the classroom. If anything, it was more like we all kind of knew, like, okay, so this person, you know, is really good at, linear equations. But, you know, but it was like everybody was really good at something, and so it was kind of like we all, like, every person in the class was, had their own thing that they were really good at doing. And so you kind of just knew if you were struggling with a concept, like, they understood it really well. So that's the person that you could, try to go to first. But it was different for everybody.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember that, like, there was one person that was just good at all of it.
Oh yeah.
You know?
No, that's very true. And at first when I started letting them confer with each other, some of them were like, "Well, isn't that like cheating?" And it's like, no, it's not cheating, because you're doing, you know, you're solving the problem your way, and then you're going to get an answer, and the other person is going to have spent time working the same problem and doing it their way, and then you're just conferring to see if you both got the same answer, because there are a lot of different ways to solve problems. And again, like I talked about yesterday, for some reason, the seventh and eighth graders that I taught were just so much more open minded about the idea that there are different ways to solve problems, and there really isn't necessarily a best way. I always used to say that the best way is the way that you understand the best. And like I said, the seventh and eighth graders were very open minded to that. My ninth graders absolutely hated it. It took me like half of the school year to convince them that I was not going to make those decisions for them. And
Yeah.
they hated it.
Or that, like, you were the end all and be all of, like, the math world. So like your way was the absolute bet. Like, you were not the math god or whatever. Like, you didn't have final say, and like, this is the way.
Right. I mean, they were taught several different ways, for instance, how to solve quadratic equations. But then when we took the test, there were several problems where, they had to choose which method they wanted to use to solve that problem. And I distinctly remember during that test, that they were like, wait a minute, you didn't tell us on number 3 which method to use. And it was like, that's right, because you have to decide which method you want to use. No, 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 no. You have to tell us. You have to tell us. You're the teacher. You have to tell us what method that you want us to use. And it was like, no, I'm not doing that. You know, math is, similar to life. In life, you're going to be presented with different types of problems, and they're going to be lots of different ways to solve those life problems. Math is the same way. You're going to be presented with a problem, and then you have to decide how you want to go about solving it. But once they got over that hump of, okay, she's serious, it really is okay for us to choose our own path that we want to go down to solving these problems. And it was so funny because by the time I had them and they were pre-calculus students, they absolutely expected to be able to solve the problem using a different method than I maybe was presenting. And sometimes, I would be presenting a problem on the board and somebody would raise their hand and say, well, I didn't solve it that way, but I still got the same answer. And so I would just draw a vertical line on the board, and I would have, like, maybe I had worked the problem on the left-hand side of that vertical line, but they were going to work the problem their way on the right-hand side of the board. And then they began to realize that at the end of each method, still got the same answer.
Right, so it really didn't matter.
No, it didn't matter. And I mean, they really began to think about, how can I solve this problem? And they knew that I wasn't married to any particular method, and so I was open-minded.
Yeah.
To how they were solving problems.
But just for clarification, it wasn't, again, math isn't magic, so you couldn't, your way could not be, magical in the sense that, you couldn't write the problem down, do one step, and then get the answer. That counts as magic because it's I don't even know what happened here.
Well, right.
You had to still have a method to the madness kind of a thing where you did still have to show all your work, how you went from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to the answer. But what you did for step 1, step 2, and step 3 didn't really matter, as long as the answer was it was still the right answer. But you still had to have those steps. You couldn't just be here's the problem, step 1, and then the answer is this. That's not.
Well, to me, again, math is a language, which means it's a form of communication, and so it's logic, and so you better be able to logically communicate to me how you went from the beginning of the problem to the end of the problem.
Well, it's almost like a story too, where you have to be able to tell the story, and so the main character, which would be the problem, can't just go to the mountains and then it's the end of the story. First of all, that's not a very good story, but second of all, nothing happened. It just ended.
Right, it was like poof, we got to the end.
Right.
And it was like, no, there's no poof.
Right, yeah.
No, there were steps involved, and I need to see all of them. They used to tease me because a lot of times when I would be presenting a new concept, and maybe it was pretty involved, I would get to the end of it and I would ask, does everybody understand? And they would be like, oh yeah, I get it. And then I would turn to the board and I'd be like, isn't it beautiful?
Yeah.
It's just beautiful. Look at this. It's so awesome. And they would be rolling their eyes and they would be, teasing me about how can I think that's beautiful. It is. It's beautiful. Look at this, But that was part of the fun of being in my math class.
Yeah.
Because I had so much passion, and I still do, for math. And, I wanted all of my students to always know that they were capable of
Yeah.
figuring it out. I wasn't asking anybody to go to college and be math majors, but I wanted them to have confidence in their own skill and their ability to think through the problem.
Right. And I think that's like an important life lesson. But the other thing that I think that you do differently in your math class was that, so we would have these projects, and it wasn't, in all the classes, all your classes that you taught. I assume you had, I don't know, because,
Yes,
you know,
they were always doing projects.
right. But, so we would do these projects, and it's not like when we got to the end of a project, like that was just the end of the project. Like, oh, no, 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 no. We had to present all of our data, all of our findings, and we learned how to, present a project and say, and kind of, discuss why we decided to do what we decided to do in the like for the Disney projects. Like, we had to kind of justify, like, okay, so we had this much money, and so we decided to stay here because it was important to us that we had X number of dollars to spend on, like just stuff like we had to justify all of our stuff, and we had to learn how to present a project and, create a project like folder, to turn it, because that's what would be graded. There would be like a participation grade, or like a speaking grade or something like that, where we would have to like, discuss the project and present it to everybody. But what would be like the physical grade for like that would, I don't know, would be like half of the
Your
overall grade, yeah. Would be whatever we turned in, and that, but we had to learn how to, put those things together and make it nice and make it look good. And I think that was, but it was more, it wasn't just like a math class. It was like, we're learning like life skills too.
Well, that's very true. And after I wasn't teaching at the school anymore, one of the students who I'd had for their ninth grade math and then later for their pre-cal class, like Abigail said, they did have to learn how to present their projects. And this particular person, after graduation, went into the Army and was stationed in Germany. And I guess everybody had to take some kind of test. And this was a student who, he was a good student, but he never really was able to get total confidence with his skill and his ability to actually think through a problem. And so when he took this test for the Army, he like scored off the chart on the math part.
Oh, wow.
Which he was in total shock about. And because of that, he got put in this other special group. And
yeah, we don't know anything, the inner workings of how the military works. So to us, it's just kind of some super special group that we know nothing about.
Right. I have no idea what they were doing or anything like that. But anyway, he got put in this, special secret group.
Yeah.
Let's just call it that. And one of the first things that they had to do was there was some problem that needed to get real life problem that needed to be solved.
Oh, Jesus.
And he really took that to heart, and he went home and, he was looking up all this data. He put this whole project together, and then the next day, he had like a PowerPoint, and the next day he went in and he presented all this stuff, and at the end of it, his classmates were like, man, you're making us look bad. What are you doing? And he just did that because that's what
that was like the standard that he had to perform at, or that he had been held to in your class. And there were, this wasn't exclusively your class. We did have other classes at that school that we had to do the same kind of thing, but it, that was the standard that we were held to.
Absolutely.
And
And when he got, like, he got to take, like, leave or something for like a month, and they paid for him to fly back to the States so that he could, have some time with his family. And he called me and wanted to
I
know
didn't know
if
that.
we could have coffee at one of the local coffee shops. And I was like, sure. And so he was telling me this story. And at the end of it, he was kind of a little bit teary eyed and was like, I'm so grateful to you for how you taught us and how you held us to that standard with our projects, because I didn't really always think that that stuff was worthwhile. But when I had that experience of having to, find a way to solve some problem, and he went home and he knew how to approach
Right.
it, he knew, like, the questions that he needed to ask himself, and then he was able to put it all together in a nice, neat little package,
Right.
and then go present it. And he was really praised by the higher ups for how professional
Yeah.
his stuff was.
Right.
And to him,
Well, it's almost like all of a sudden, like, it became relevant.
oh
Like,
yeah,
not that it wasn't at the time, but there is sort of that element of, I could definitely see the element of, like, yeah, I mean, this is just a project for math. Like, this is just what we do. I may or may not actually use any of this stuff, in the real world, any of these skills in the real world.
absolutely.
And I could totally see how, like, all of us, and to me, probably very naively, I never would have, like, equated, like, going into the armed forces and then, like, all of a sudden having to be in some super special group that you now have, you get picked to, like, present something, probably very naively on my part. That just isn't what comes to mind. But, but I could totally see how, like, I can't be the only person that, that's not what comes to mind when you think of the armed forces. So I could totally see how, like, he was even slightly taken aback when he was like, oh, you mean, like, this stuff matters. Like, I'm actually going to use some of the stuff, Mrs. Thomas. I'll bleep that out. I learned, like, the skills.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think he was very pleasantly surprised that everything that I had done for them in the classroom all of a sudden was very relevant to his life. And not only was it relative to his life, but it was actually, he was actually praised for it and moved on along,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
positive way, into his career. It helped further his career
Right.
in the Army, because he was able to do these things that
Right.
other people, either just didn't ever learn how to do that, or they chose the easier, softer way.
Right.
Whereas this particular person really took the bull by the horns and did what he had been taught to do, and there was a big payoff in the end.
Right. Right.
So
I mean, I do think that, though, we do need to talk about how, we're very much aware of the fact that, like, so, like, when I had you for 7th, 8th, and 9th grade math, really 6th grade too, but whatever. But then I moved to a bigger public school in 10th grade. And all of a sudden I went from being in a class of, like, I don't know, like 12 or 15, where we had, every single class every single day, 5 days a week, to a totally new environment where it was what's called block scheduling. So that means you only have 4 classes that are like an hour and a half. So like your Monday and Wednesday classes are the same. You have the same 4 classes on Monday and Wednesday, and Tuesday and Thursday you have the same 4 classes. So you have like 2 days to do your homework, I guess is the thinking. But also the class size, I went from a class of 12 to 15 kids to being one of, like 40 people sitting in a class. And it is kind of, I don't know. We're very much aware of the fact that like it's not practical to be able to do all of these projects and really have the individualized attention when you're one teacher that has, like 7 classes full of upwards of 40 kids apiece. Like, how are you supposed to grade all of that? Yeah. Like that's madness. I mean, I totally understand that like it would be next to impossible to figure out how to do that.
Well, one of the things that I always did was when I was grading homework, I would write comments like, you dropped a sign.
Right.
Or,
well, you were really able to go through each person's homework. And I mean, my specific experience in 10th grade, which was just, it was really bad because, I did go from super individualized attention to just kind of being one of many, many, many faces to a teacher. And I had geometry my 10th grade year. And the way that the teacher had it set up was she would assign homework. So I don't know, maybe there were like 30 or 40 problems or something in the homework. But there would be these things called quick checks. And it was only like 5 or 6 problems out of the entire homework. And you had to staple the quick checks to the front of like
an answer sheet.
Yeah. And all the quick check, like that front page was the only thing that was getting graded. Like those were the only problems that were getting graded. And you literally just had to write the answer. Like this teacher wouldn't go through to like check your work. She wouldn't even, so for make sure you did, all the stuff. It was essentially just like, you could have done 25 of the problems, I assume. And then, I mean, for all she knows, you could have just copied the answers from the internet or the back of the book or your neighbor or whatever. And those were the answers. Like there was no checking of like the work. There was nothing. And so it was literally just right or wrong. And so if you got 2 of the quick checks wrong out of the 5 that were being graded, then it didn't matter that you did all the other work. You didn't even know what you did wrong to get those questions wrong. They were just wrong. And so you ended up with like a 60 as a homework grade, not really knowing why, knowing what happened, knowing anything. And I feel like I couldn't have been the only person that had this happen, but there were several times where I accidentally copied, like I had the answer correct in the homework portion where like I had worked it out, but for whatever reason, the answer that was in the homework portion didn't get transferred. Like the right answer didn't get transferred to the quick checks. And so even though I had the right answer in the homework, like the worked out part of it, it was still wrong because I didn't write the correct answer on that front page.
Right. And you couldn't go back to her and say, hey, when I was making my answer sheet, I got
right, like 7, I got this one and this one mixed up or whatever.
Right. Or I just didn't transfer it correctly to the answer sheet. And you couldn't go back and say, hey, this is what happened, because she didn't care.
Yeah. And
she couldn't. I mean, she had too many students.
There was no, I mean, I totally I get that now, being older, I understand that, like, that's kind of just the brutal reality of that situation. But as a student, you know, my confidence went from being pretty high with math to just being totally decimated with math, because it was just like, well, but I didn't, like, this isn't what my real grade was. Like, I didn't really get a 60 because, you know, I just messed up and didn't transfer. Like, I actually only got one wrong instead of, two or three. And it was, it just, and I know I can't be the only student that,
Oh no.
Had that happen. But, it does kind of shatter your confidence. And I can totally understand, like, how, if that had been your experience with math, just like the whole, yeah, or your entire school career, I could totally understand where you would just be like, I mean, yeah, I'm just not, I give up. I'm not doing this because this is awful. This is horrible.
Right.
And I don't think that that's necessarily the teacher's fault. I think that's more of just like a victim of how we as a society have set up classrooms. I don't think that we can put all the blame on a teacher, because it's like, what do you want them, like, what do you expect them to do when they have 7 classes of like 40 people?
Right. And I consider that abuse of teachers. I really do, because, you know, who knows what they would be able to accomplish if they had much smaller class sizes. I've had experience with several different private schools, and I can tell you that they pretty much cap those classes to 15 or 16 students. And there's a reason that they do that, you know, because they know from their own experience that if you get much higher than that, teachers start to lose their effectiveness. And so anybody that says to me that class size doesn't matter, I don't believe that. I I don't care what the data says on that, because in my own experience, those smaller class sizes, students just they learn so much more. As a teacher, you can be so much more creative. When I was doing that logo project, we met with the math department, with the professors that were running the project once a month, and I was the only teacher that taught at a private school that was included, in the group that was in the grant. Everybody else was a public school teacher. I was fortunate that I had a principal that was very supportive of what I was trying to accomplish. She totally understood how it was relevant to what I was what that I was still meeting all the criteria that the state said that I had to meet.
Right. And didn't you say that
Oh, they all
the
hated
principal,
me.
well, no, the principal was, she kind of just let you do, like, as long as you were, as long as it was math, you were teaching math, you weren't like trying to, you know teach English or something, and you're math, like, as long as you were teaching math in the math class, she was pretty much like, do whatever, as long as you're teaching math, and they're gonna be able to, you know you can show me that they've actually learned, the or, the list of things that the state says that 7th graders are supposed to know by the end of the year. Then she was kind of like, I mean, do whatever.
Right, but I did keep her abreast of, what kind of projects we were doing and why.
Yeah,
And
yeah, but you never felt like she was going to be like, absolutely not. We can't do
oh
that.
no,
Right.
no, 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 no. And but those other, the public school teachers hated me because, I would come in and I would have examples of stuff that my kids had been doing, and they had nothing because
Because they
their
had
principal,
40
well,
people.
but their principal wasn't gonna allow them to use, computer lab time to work on that project, because those principals couldn't see the value, because all they cared about was these kids need to get to the end of the school year so that they can pass this standardized test that the state says that they have to pass. And if your kids don't pass, then that's on you, teacher.
Yeah, which is totally ridiculous. Again, I think it goes back to the abuse of teachers
Oh
of
yeah.
just like,
I mean, they basically have been set up for failure,
oh yeah,
and I have much empathy for what they have to go through. I don't think it's necessary. I really don't. I think
no,
there's so many other ways that they could go about this. Um, but they're kind of locked into whatever their administration tells them that they have to do.
right. I mean, it's like they get no say.
Yeah, they
They
get no say.
just, they just kind of have to do whatever they're told they have to do, and they're on the chopping block. Oh, by the way, like it's not the principal that gets, you know, screwed over if the kids don't learn, if they don't pass the standardized test. I'm sure there are repercussions for administration, but I feel like at least the way it's portrayed to me is that it's really on the teacher and your job is on the line if like they get those standardized tests back and
Yeah.
like the vast majority of them like fail or what. I don't even know how you quantify that. Like
Well, and I do think it's important to say that this is just my perception.
right, never have it.
Well, just like because all of my kids have been in private school for a period of time, and then at some point they were also in public school for a period of time, and their experiences were just black and white.
Oh yeah,
You know,
just so different.
so very very different, and I think they would all say that the private school, because of the smaller classes and because of the individualized attention, that was better, from their own experience.
Right.
You can't hide in a class of
No,
15.
no.
You can't, because when as a teacher, when I have such small classes like that, I can get to know my students,
Oh yeah.
and I know who's struggling with what concept, and then I can kind of take those students under my wing, at least for that particular concept, and help them get over that hump. But the next concept, maybe they get really well, and I have a different group of students who I've now taken under my wing. But they can't hide. There was no way they could hide. In a
Right.
class of 40, you can hide.
Oh yeah, 100%. You can definitely hide. Um I do think it's important though to also talk about like, so now, like right now, you're, I don't know, what do you consider like a tutor
Well,
at the
okay, so
local community college?
right. So now I work at the local community college, and I work with students who typically our typical student is somebody who graduated from high school and pretty much hated math, but now they're faced with having to take college algebra, and they have no skill so that they can successfully get through college algebra with a passing grade. And so my job is to work with these students and try to take them from, the basic math level to being able to do like algebra 2 type concepts, and then they'd be ready to take college algebra. And so many of my students have said, if somebody had explained to me how to work these problems the way that you explain it, I probably would have really liked math when I was in school. And what's really interesting about that is, I mentioned in episode 1 that my dad was a PhD mathematician, but he loved teaching. That was really his passion. And when he would have students say to him, I don't really like math, I just have to get through this calculus 1 class and then I'm done. That this is all my degree plan requires. He would always ask them, think back to when you were in K through 12 and think about, when was it that you had such a bad experience that you walked away from that school year going, I hate math, I don't understand it, it seems like magic to me.
Yeah.
It's just this big mystery. And every single student could go back and pinpoint and tell him exactly what grade that occurred in and who the teacher was that turned them off on that.
Oh, yeah.
And I've done the same thing. And it just hurts my heart, honestly, that students have that experience.
Yeah. Well, didn't you say that, like, I don't know, where did you say, what's her name? Tobias something?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that what she said? Like, didn't she write some paper and, like, that's what the whole concept was? Or was it,
Well,
I don't know, maybe I'm thinking about that wrong.
Sheila Tobias did a lot of research and kind of coined the phrase math anxiety. And I was
Back in, like, the
thinking-
90s, right?
I want to say it was, but don't hold me to that because it's been a while.
Right.
Back in the early 90s, I was taking graduate level education classes, and I happened upon her and her research, and I had never really thought about it from the standpoint of, actually, that students would actually have math anxiety. And while I was taking these graduate level classes, I was also a tutor for the math department. And I began to realize that this was a real thing. That, I had students that
Maybe she was on to something.
they had like one math class that they had to take. Like, let's say it was college algebra that they had to take in order to complete their degree plan. And they would wait until the last semester of their senior year
Oh, no.
to take this math class, which meant that they hadn't had any math since they graduated from high school.
Oh, no.
And so,
It's like 3.5 years.
Years has gone by. And they graduated from high school with not a great attitude toward math, with little to no confidence
Right.
in their skill or their ability to reason through how to solve these problems. And
Right.
now,
Just a really bad taste in their mouth,
right,
you know.
and now, they're having panic attacks on a daily basis because they're having to
Well, it's
work
the
problems.
last semester of their college career, and they just want it to be over. I would assume that that's the feeling of, like, I just want it to be over. Please just, like, what do I have to do?
Well, right, but the stakes were so high because this one class could
Yeah.
keep them from being able to graduate.
Right.
And so they had created a situation in which, not only were they prone to have math anxiety, but now that anxiety is heightened because if they don't pass this class, they're not going to graduate.
Right. It's super high stakes.
Super high stakes, But I really do believe that math anxiety is a thing. And, that was certainly something that I saw with students when I was actually teaching. But I would move heaven and earth if I had to try to get my students past that math anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and to help them gain confidence. But part of the way that I did that was that, my classroom was an extremely safe place. There was no judgment. There were no dumb questions. There were no silly questions. And even more importantly, students were not allowed to shame each other.
Oh, absolutely not. That goes back to what Papa said in his classes. Like, just because a concept is super easy for you right now, like, that doesn't mean that at some point down the line there won't be a concept that you just, for whatever reason, don't get either. So, like, there was no, like, you couldn't say something like, well, that's easy. because you don't know if, just because it's easy for you doesn't mean that somebody else in the class is sitting there going, I just don't get it. Because that counts as shaming, because then they feel dumb for not understanding it. Like you couldn't say stuff like that.
Well, I never wanted my students to feel that there was going to be some kind of negative consequence to them asking a question.
Right.
I mean, I was not going to shame them, and I wasn't going to allow their peers to shame them either.
Right.
And so the classroom became a very safe place. And so, they would ask questions. And, I would tell them too that just remember, if you're sitting there and, you don't understand how I went from step 4 to step 5, there are other people in the class that don't know how I went from step 4 to step 5 either.
Right. You're just the only one that said something.
Right. Exactly.
And that's okay.
Yeah, you're not unique. There are other people
right
in the classroom that are probably having the same question that you have. But creating that safe environment and building that trust with the students, that does take time.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be a lot of consistency.
Right.
That, they learned that I meant what I said. We're not going to be shaming each other.
Right, but it kind of goes back to like the penny thing, where you also created an environment in which, life happened and you, for whatever reason, just didn't get around to figuring out what happened with the pennies. And you were open to when my classmate walked in and was like, I figured it out. I know what the problem is. You weren't the teacher going, no. Like trying to make it up kind of, like there was no shame that like he had figured it out and you didn't. It was very much like, what do you got? Like, I don't know either because I didn't I didn't have time. So what do you have?
Right. Well, but that was okay with that.
Oh yeah. Just because it kind of broke down that barrier of like the teacher's supposed to have all the answers. You were very much like open and honest about like, I don't have all the answers. I really don't know everything. Just because I'm up here and you're, sitting there doesn't mean that I know all the things.
Right. Well, but that goes back to the fact that, I wasn't rigid. Whereas some teachers will say, this is how we're going to solve quadratic equations and that's the end of it. We're doing it this way. There may be other ways to do it, but this is how I'm doing it, and this is the way that you're going to be expected to do it when I test you. No, I wasn't
right.
a teacher,
But there's also that feeling of I'm the teacher, you're the student. I stand up here and do the deal, and you sit there and listen and take notes.
Right.
And if you don't understand it, come see me after class for 5 seconds, or go find the internet, see what the internet's got to say, or find a tutor, or come to me, for the 30 minutes I have office hours before school, or the 30 minutes to an hour that I have after school, like that's how that problem is solved. In classes of much bigger class size. I mean, I would assume that happens, in smaller class sizes too, but I can justify it more if you have 40 kids in a class, because it's like I just like I literally do not have time to go through 7 different ways of teaching how to do quadratic equations to 40 different kids, 7 different class periods. Like there's just it's completely ridiculous to even assume that again, abusive teachers, you can't there's just no way that works out.
No, and like I said before, I have a lot of empathy for teachers that are in that position, because I really do believe that they're doing the best that they can with what they've been given. They've just been dealt a really bad hand, you know.
And I don't think that's fair, though, especially for teachers. Like, I mean, but I also think that, teachers should be paid more. So I don't, I understand that, there's a possibility that's not like a super, you know, like well thought of thing. I don't know. I think teachers should be paid more.
Well, they do have huge responsibilities.
Yeah.
It's their job to, get these students from, point A at the beginning of the year to point B at the end of the year. But,
What's the argument? Do you know what the argument for why, even in public schools, why we can't, like, break it up, break everything up to where so that teachers would have a more manageable class size? Do you know what the argument
well,
is?
I think that it's just money.
Oh,
That they'd have to hire more teachers. They may not even have, like the right amount of classrooms, which means that they might have to build on, to create enough classrooms to where teachers could actually have, maybe 20 kids in a class, which is way better than, 30 to 40. It's still, I think,
kind of flirting
more
with danger there.
flirting with danger there, but again, that even that would be an improvement
Oh
over
yeah,
what they're facing now. But
it's just money. You think?
I think that's a lot. A lot of it is
Well,
money.
because the other thing that like I've never taken a math class like this, but I have had friends that have taken math online. And you are firsthand experience right now trying to, given the current COVID situation, you know, you're trying to figure out how to do that. But
Yeah,
I've had,
in an effective way.
right, but I've had friends that have taken math, and for some reason I still don't. I assume, it all goes back to money. I assume that it goes back to that. But I have had friends that have taken classes at the local community college, and for whatever reason this local community college has the option to where you can take certain subjects in 8 weeks online, or 8 weeks in the class or something. They're 8 week classes. Again, I assume it has to do with money or whatever, but it's ridiculous, I think. And the people that I have talked to that have taken math either online or in a classroom for 8 weeks have literally said every single time, I don't think I learned a single thing in the 8 week math class. There's no way. I don't even, like, they've all been like, yeah, I'd never do that again. And also, I don't think I learned anything.
Right, but I don't find that surprising either because, taking a college, taking college algebra, whether it's at a community college or at a four-year institution, is going to be a very different experience than if you took, algebra, pre-cal, maybe even calculus at the high school level.
Right.
There's just going to be a standard that's higher,
Mm-hmm.
and again, those are not student centered.
Right, learning.
Yeah, that's
But I don't even know how you would teach math in an 8 week class.
well, the pace is very fast, and so if you don't have strong skill, then
Right, but
it's going to
who's
be
going to
very
community college, the local community college, and taking an 8 week math class that has just like super strong, like, to me it's just like you just don't know your audience, because it's like I don't know who you think is taking and or learning anything in an 8 week math class. I don't even know how you could cover one concept effectively in that short amount of time.
well. I think
Like,
that
how do you do that?
well, I think a lot of students who take college algebra and do well at the community college level in that 8 week block is there are students who were good at math in high school. And so
Oh, okay.
they've
Oh, yeah.
already been exposed to a lot of community college algebra class.
Right.
So really, it's just a repeat for them.
Right, but I would also assume that these are also not people who, these are people who went straight from high school to, these are not people who like, took time off, and went and did something else for a little while. Like these are, these are people who directly went from graduating high school to college. Like, had June and July to do whatever over the summer and then went straight back to school. These are not people that like,
I would say that that's probably, the majority of them. But there are students who graduated from high school and maybe did decide that they wanted to, work for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then they decided, hey, I'm tired of doing this. I really do want to get my degree now. But again, when they show up and they're going to take college algebra, typically they were good at math in high school.
Yeah.
And they actually did learn it. So it's kind of like riding a bike in a way that you may think that you have forgotten it,
but it'll like come back.
I mean, there is a file folder in your brain that actually does have stuff in it that you can pull from.
Right.
But I'm telling you that there are lots of students who show up.
I would assume the majority.
I don't know if you could say the majority, but there's definitely
a lot.
Look, there are enough that my department exists.
Yeah. Okay. Fair.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
They know there's a need.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
There's got to be. I don't think you would exist if it was like 4 people.
Our department wouldn't exist if it was only 4 people.
Right.
So anyway.
Right. But I mean, now, again, given the COVID situation, you've also said in all of your math classes that, it's a learning experience. We're all going to learn how to do this together. I definitely remember those words being spoken in your class of, we're all going to figure this out together, and, it's a journey. We're going to,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's all it. I would be preparing, to teach a concept, and in my own mind, I would be trying to kind of, anticipate what I thought they would be struggling with, in understanding the concept. And 9 times out of 10, I was so totally wrong. That they would actually get that part, and it would be this whole totally separate thing.
Right.
And, I would always have to laugh at myself because, I rarely anticipated it correctly. And
right.
So they were always teaching me as much
right.
as I was teaching them. But again, that was just my style of teaching. I truly wanted to achieve the goal of having a very student-centered classroom, not a teacher-centered classroom. I would tell them, look, I already graduated from high school.
Right.
I already graduated from college. I know how to work the problem.
Right.
You're the one that has to do the work.
Yeah.
Learn how to work the problem.
Right.
I'm just here to kind of facilitate the learning.
Right.
But ultimately, it's on you.
Yeah. To figure out, if you, or to really be honest with yourself,
right.
Of, oh yeah, no, I really do get it. Or maybe I don't get it as well as I thought. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but part of that learning journey, I feel like you did say to me at some point, that there were a lot of those projects that we did that you just kind of like made up on the fly. You never, it was never like something that you had planned for like months,
that would have been like the gummy worm project. I mean, that was definitely
right.
hatched during the,
right.
I don't know why we have to learn this. There's no,
yeah. When am I ever going to need this?
Yeah, right, exactly. There's no application for this. Oh yeah? Well, here we go.
Right, yeah.
But but that's also the engineer in me, because that's what engineers do. They solve problems.
Real life
Right. You know,
problems.
I remember one time when I was teaching pre-calculus, that somebody said, I don't know, why we have to, work these problems for homework or something, um, or why we have to do this project or whatever. And I remember saying, you know what? When I was working as an engineer, I never went to work, and my boss said, "Here you go. If you can work these 30 problems by the end of the day,
Right.
we'll call it good."
Yeah.
Okay? No, it never came at me like that. It was always there was some word problem that had to be solved.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really think that was it. That it was not the homework or the projects, but it was really that they didn't like word problems, and so they were like, "I don't understand why we have to learn how to do these." And that was the response was is that nobody ever came to me and said, "Work these 30 problems, get them done today, and we'll call it good, and you can get a paycheck."
Right, yeah.
No, no. The problem always comes as a word problem,
Yeah.
and then you have to sit.
No, we have a well that we want to, like
Yeah.
that we want to drill, so, but I guess it's kind of like, I lucked out, and a lot of your students I know would say the same thing, was we lucked out when we had you as a math teacher, because I've seen this like meme so many times. I think I've told you this of, it's a little bit arrogant on my part, and I guess on all of your students' part, because I'm sure at some point we thought about math problems like this, but once you taught us how to, read a word problem, take out the information that was useful and what we don't need, what's kind of just fluff, and we really understood how to, we had our confidence built. But I've seen so many memes that are like, math class, on the test, it's like, Jerry has 20 oranges. The train comes at 2 p.m. Calculate the mass of the sun. And for whatever reason, one day I saw that and it clicked in my head of like, oh, that's what other people see when they see a word problem, or when they work math, or when they see a problem that they don't know how to solve in math or something. Like, that's how other people see math. And it's like, because I never really understood, from like my own personal experience. Like, I don't really think I can pinpoint a time when I ever had that particular experience where I just looked at something and was like, I mean, none of this makes any sense. Like, I don't even.
Yeah, you don't even know where to start.
Yeah, it's like, like I just look at it and it's like, yeah, I mean, for all I know, you could be asking what the weight of the television is. Like, I don't know. But that's what other people see. And it took me to see that meme several times to be like, oh, I could totally see how, like, if that was your experience, if that was your entire experience with math, how you could see a problem and just be like, yeah, I don't even know. Like, I completely give up. Because if you were never taught how to take out or like, ask the question, what do they want to know? What are they asking for here? Because they're not going to give, there's going to be some information in this word problem that you don't need, but there's also information in here that you do need. And to figure out how to like sift through that.
Well, it's kind of like how I teach just basic geometry problems. So, basic geometry pretty much is composed of being able to calculate, the perimeter or the circumference of a shape, the area of a shape, and the volume of a shape. And, again, if you were trying to solve a word problem, first thing that I would tell them to do is identify what shape are we dealing with. You can surely read the problem
Right.
and determine, is it a triangle, is it a square,
Sphere, what is it? Or a circle,
whatever,
yeah.
What is it, and so then, you just read until you get to some type of punctuation and you figure out what's important in that little piece
Yeah.
of the puzzle, and you just keep doing that until you get to the end. And
But you have to break it up. I do remember that was always your big thing
you
was
always have to break it up, but then, if it says, calculate the area, of the rug or whatever. Well, if it's a rectangle and they want area, well, what the area formula for a rectangle is. So
right.
Write that down.
Right.
And then go back and see, did they give me any information about the length? Did they give me any information about the width? What do I know?
Yeah.
What am I trying to solve? And doing it that way, that really speaks to a lot of my students. And I feel like I can say that with a lot of confidence because they tell me that method works for them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it works for me. And my husband had you for math too. And, he says the same thing, so.
Yeah. I mean, but again, I love math. And so, I'm always trying to think of different ways that I can explain
in an interesting way.
Well, right, but hopefully that are helpful. I have a lot of tricks in my bag, to pull from to help students. But my goal too is to arm them when they go out into the world, whether that's to community college or a four-year institution or just into life, that they have a lot of tricks in their bag too.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely one of the things that you taught us, especially with, by kind of approaching it where, there's more than one way to solve a problem. That's not just useful in math. That's useful in like all areas.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's been kind of our relationship with math. That is long, but we did want to break it up because we felt it was important to talk about in kind of a longer form. Yeah, we're on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, or Apple Podcast. We're trying to get on iHeartRadio and Pandora, we are on iHeartRadio, but we're trying to get on Pandora. Internal Dialogues of a Curious Human at protonmail.com is the email if you want to send us emails about your experience with math, or even if you want a suggestion on maybe even though you have 25 kids in a class or something, like what could you do, or your experience with trying to teach in a large classroom, or that kind of stuff. Also, my mom is learning how to do it online, so if you've got tips, I'm sure she would.
Oh yeah. Tips are welcome.
Yeah.
Remember, I'm very open-minded.
Yeah, anything that works for you, or even if it's stuff that you're like, I did this, don't do it.
Right,
yeah.
Your experience, whether good or bad, is very welcome.
Yeah. We're on Twitter at all lowercase letters internal_A. So yeah, that's where you can find us. That's the email, and come follow us on social media. I hope you enjoyed it. We had a good time.
Yeah, we had an awesome time.
So thanks, and we will see you guys later. Bye.
All right.
Good.
Good.
It's done.
I gotta pee.
Yeah, I do too, but I need to save this first.
Yeah. Do that. Okay, it's after 1.
That's fine.